Well, good afternoon. I expect that you can hear me. If you can, please put that in the chat. My name is Matthew Leffler. It is so exciting to be here for this virtual panel on one of the most interesting topics that all of us care really deeply about, the supply chain. What is it? What's it all about? We're going to dive into that today. So before we get into the guests, the panelists we'll be having in just a moment, my name is Matthew Leffler. I'm the Vice President of Sales and Marketing for a company called Contract Leasing Corporation, a trailer lessor that operates about, let's say, 18,000 trailers across North America. I'm also known as the armchair attorney. I'm a lawyer who's been practicing for a few years, since 2010. And I'm a guy who loves supply chain. I've been in this business since 2010, but my dad's a roadway guy back in 1976. So this stuff is what I'm deeply passionate about. Now, what I'm excited to do today is introduce you to some incredible speakers whose experience is so diverse and so expansive that we can add a lot of value understanding our supply chain today and how we've built more resiliency or haven't built more resiliency. So I'm going to give a little brief description of each of our speakers, then we'll bring them up and we'll begin the conversation. As we go through, this is kind of an interactive thing, right? So there's a Q&A under the chat. You can put a question in there. We'll try to answer that for you. And our hope is this will go for about half hour, 45 minutes as we dive into various topics in the supply chain. So let me tell you a little bit about the folks who are joining us. First guy is Dean Vicka. He's the president of National Lease. National Lease is one of the largest full-service truck leasing organizations in North America. It's made up of about 120 independent businesses that work together with over 1,000 service locations across the U.S. and Canada. Dean's an old friend of mine. I'm so excited to have him with us today. Our other panelist is Holly Pierce. She's the Director of Logistics for C&D Technologies and Trojan Battery Corporation. She's been doing this for a minute, and she's one of the most prolific speakers that I've ever encountered in the world of supply chain from the shipper's perspective. The batteries that they make are some of the world's leading suppliers of deep cycle batteries. She's importing, she's exporting, and she's got a first class seat looking into what is happening day to day in the world of supply chain. And our final panelist is Jason Miller, the interim chairperson of the Department of Supply Chain Management at the Michigan State University's Eli Broad College of Business. If you don't know who Jason is, do yourself a favor. You ought to follow him. He is an absolute fantastic resource in this space, one of the smartest guys in the business, and I am so excited to be here. So everyone, thank you for joining us. How is everyone doing today?
Doing good, guys.
Doing good.
Well, I want to kick this thing off because I want to understand the supply chain. So we had a time right now, which is pretty great, I think, for shippers. So I'm going to start with my shipper friend. Holly, tell our guest a little bit about what you do day to day and what have you experienced over the last few years in the world of supply chain?
Sure. And yes, today is good for shippers, but don't worry, tomorrow it'll be different. The cycle always turns. Dean knows the cycle always turns. So yeah, I have been in logistics and supply chain for 23 years. And I would say prior to COVID, we had a few rough years as shippers, 2018 and 2019 specifically. It was tough. There was a lot of explaining to do, as they say, to my executive team. And then once the pandemic hit, it became really important for what my company does, which is we make industrial batteries, golf carts, motive, floor scrubbers, forklifts, as well as uninterrupted power supplies. We do marine as well as RVs. And what did people do during the pandemic? They socially distanced, but still went out and did things like golfing or, going across the country in an RV. So we were really challenged. We never shut down. My folks were able to continue manufacturing throughout at all 5 of our plants in North America. And we have a good book of business that, kind of has slowly been weeded through as people have gotten the batteries they need. But I'm excited to talk to Dean too, because we had a good chat on our pre-call. And I was thinking, man, between the two of us, we have some good stories, don't we, Dean?
There's a few. A couple of scars, I think, right?
Yes.
Let me ask you this question, Holly. When you got into what moment in supply chain did you realize in your career that you were never getting out of this business? What moment did that happen? When did that crystallize for you?
You want the nitty gritty answer?
Absolutely.
So when I was able to work for a company that you may know some of the products they had: Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus, Disney on Ice, Disney Live, and I was a manager of international transportation. I had to export shows, people, animals, ice floors, popcorn machines, all the things. And I realized it's in your blood. You can't get out of it. And, telling my mom and dad that I ran away to the circus was probably one of the coolest things I got to do, So.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, as you were talking about like the inventory, so one of the things we heard a lot about in the pandemic was everything's been just-in-time inventory. No one really had like a just-in-case. When you start seeing things shut down, what did that do to your business? What was the biggest challenge you had to wrestle with during COVID?
So lead acid batteries specifically is unique. We've actually done a lot of vertical integration. And so I get lead ingot and we bring it to our plants. We make lead oxide, which is the paste and the graphs, the grids that we put into our batteries to conduct the electrolytes and to get the power going through. And so thankfully, the majority of my product is sourced in North America, probably about 98%. I do a little bit of imports from Europe and from APAC. But what I will tell you has been a challenge is the secondary and tertiary suppliers, right? Because even though I'm getting separators, which have glass and fabric in it, we found out, with the Russia-Ukraine incursion, we're like, oh, our tertiary supplier is getting fabric from the Ukraine. They were getting like pieces of cotton and things like that. So we had to find an alternate supplier to go into our French-made separators. And so I think you're right. The just-in-time became really popular because, if you have bean counters, accountants running what you do, and they want to make sure you have low inventory levels and you stay liquid, they say, well, if you can get all of your materials in 7 days, then you should only have 8 days of stock, 9 days of stock, maybe, just in case. And I would say yes now, and specifically with retailers, right? They're learning that the bullwhip effect is real. And I'm looking forward to Jason kind of giving us some insight on that, because I do love his charts and graphs, especially on LinkedIn.
Well, we'll go to Dean in a second. Let's talk about some charts and graphs. Jason, for those who don't know you, and obviously I'm a huge fan of what you've been doing. So tell us a little bit about what were you doing day to day? What did you see before the pandemic, during, and then what's happened kind of afterwards?
Honestly, before the pandemic, government data and supply chain was fairly boring. We had, the excitement of 2018, 2019, in late 2017 with sort of the bull market in trucking, but there wasn't really that much, I'd say, that's exciting. It was sort of smooth and steady, go through market cycles. Since then, we've had certainly the most turbulence that we've ever seen in the history of government data, in many cases going back, decades and decades in terms of demand spikes that go up. As Holly was talking, I was pulling up, we were mentioning social distancing, travel trailer and camper production, which, believe it or not, is a industrial production series that's published. The all-time record high was in 2022 or late 2021, and now today we are at levels that are back to 2012, coming out of the global financial crisis. Wow. So you just see that incredible demand, and then demand falls very steadily because you've got a durable good. People that bought them, and then you have inflation at 40-year high levels. And so I think that we've been dealing a lot with more than anything, the unpredictability of demand. I think so much of the inventory story that we saw in 2022 was more so about demand planners just over extrapolating what sales growth was going to be, because people love to sort of, linear trend project, and people were projecting 2020 from 2019 growth onto 21. And then that really didn't materialize. And we were left with a lot of extra stocks that we weren't anticipating, or projecting Q1, Q2, 2021 sales, and then growing into 2022, which wasn't reasonable because of stimulus. We have all this excess stock, and now we've been through effectively an 18-month inventory downsizing cycle.
Well, I guess the nice thing is we've learned our lessons, and we're never going to let that happen again, right? Like we're kind of insulated ourselves from any future catastrophes. Is that a fairly accurate statement? Maybe.
No.
All right. Well, let's get a little bit more practical here. So, Dean, with national lease, how many assets, like trucks, trailers, how many vehicles are part of what you do in your business?
Yeah, Matt. We've got 85,000 pieces of power, mostly in the class 6 through 8 realm, 45,000 of which are class 8 trucks, and just over 100,000 trailers that are in our system in the United States and Canada.
So when pandemics are hitting, I mean, in our world of procuring equipment, like you're usually just doing replacements, like there's new growth and all this kind of stuff. Tell me a little bit about the world of procuring assets during the pandemic.
Yeah, well, I mean, it hasn't ended, and quite frankly, it's changing literally as we speak right now, almost overnight again. So for us, and again, right, I think a little context. Our typical customer, right, is we're supporting a private fleet, a company like Walgreens. You see a Walgreens truck, a Walgreens trailer. Well, that's actually ours. We own it, we maintain it. About 50% of those trucks on the road that you see that are private fleets are leased from companies like us, Ryder, Penske, and a couple of the OEM leasing organizations. So, Holly calls it, that circle or whatever. For me, it's like an EKG report. It kind of goes up, it goes down. Transportation always works that way. But our customers are committing to a truck for 5 or 7 years on average, right? So we're pretty safe there. We always say, unless they go bankrupt. And that came up, right? And that was definitely a real fear. The part that really goes up and down as the markets go, the freight markets go, is our daily rental, right? Somebody can run a truck today, Amazon, FedEx, whatever. They need extra trucks during Christmas, right? Where do they come? They come to Ryder, they come to Penske, they come to us, hopefully us first. But those things happen. So when we went into it, we had I can remember the day. It was March 17th. I was actually down in New Orleans where Holly is going on St. Patrick's Day, and really everything started shutting down, right? And then all of a sudden, our customers started calling like that week, right? And we said, oh boy, what's this going to be? And at first, you kind of thought it was like, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks. All right, I just got to make sure I catch a flight back to Chicago. But then it started going a little longer, right? And then things were getting shut down. And I remember, we've got a big customer. I'm not going to name who they are, but they haul all the flowers that go up and down the East Coast, right? They come into Miami, then they go up to all these flower stores, right? Well, who was buying flowers and delivering flowers? Nobody. Every single truck was up against the fence. And our customers started calling us left and right and saying, hey, can we get extended payment terms? Maybe go 60 to 90 days to 120. Can we, we're just charging you, a fixed rate, and there's no mileage rate because they're not running the truck, right? And assets are just sitting up against the fence. And we really started putting a tourniquet on everything and said, how are we going to do this and get through this time? And then maybe 60 days later, 90 days later, probably July or August, right? The first big influx of money went back into the system, and everything happened, and everything was good from that standpoint. And quite frankly, for a lot of us, it was very good financially, right? A lot of companies, and that's not a political statement; it's just a fact of what really happened. And but what happened there, right, is everybody had money, right? So we all had money at home to buy stuff, to order stuff, and have it delivered. But nobody was going back to work and making anything. And there was also supply chain glut because, to Holly's point, right, there wasn't any, just-in-time delivery. There wasn't any overstock sitting there, so that, remember what the price of lumber did, what the price of everything.
Price of trailers, Dean. I remember dry vans that normally are like 35, 40,000, $80,000. It's bananas.
Yeah. So that changed overnight. So all of a sudden we all had this money, but nobody could make anything, right? So supply chain 101, economics 101, supply and demand, right? Supply was here, demand was here, unbelievable pressure. I've never been more proud to be part of an organization than I was with the National Lease people working. Our service is our mechanics. Everybody can buy a truck, everybody can do it. What separates us from our competitors is our ability to keep that asset on the road. And that's our mechanics going to work every day when it was a scary time and a lot of things had to change, right? An extra hour was built into labor every shift to clean up work areas and to have everybody, and to make sure second shift wasn't integrating face-to-face with first shift, right? Which then also goes into a communication issue. What's going on with this truck? That's got to go, right? So it was just an incredible time of having to, think of your feet in the supply chain. I mean, quite frankly, right? I mean, I don't think, I think people really got a real appreciation for what goes on with trucks and drivers and mechanics and things of that nature. So we're still going through that. We haven't come out of it with supply chain. Now, while we were on allocation, everybody needed trucks. and nobody could get enough trucks. That's starting to change, especially with the leasing companies. And we're a big purchaser of what goes on. So while trucking companies, I think transportation companies are still buying and using all their allocation, we didn't last quarter. And now I think that's going to be a short window because 2027 is going to come up. But there's still a lot of uncertainty and trying to get fleet size right and get your cost up. But things are still going up and up, up and up while demand is definitely falling off the table.
Pulling the thread on that demand side of things, everyone keeps talking about a freight recession. The question is, how long does it go? And I want to turn to Jason because I'm going to assume he has the exact truthful answer. Jason, what is going on? How long is this expected? Are we looking Q2 of next year? Is it Q1 of 2025? What are you thinking?
So for how long, I would kind of date, sort of peak seasonally adjusted activity was March of 2022. We went down a little bit subsequently. Then it was really about September 2022 was where we started to see sort of a steady fall in volume. In terms of magnitude, ton mileage is down somewhere between, I'd say, 3 and 5% from that peak period. That may not seem like a lot, but that is historically a fairly deep freight recession that's comparable to, I always call it the great offshoring recession of 2000 through about 2003. Looks nothing like the global financial crisis, though. Whenever people compare this to the GFC, it's comically not the same. GFC was 20% loss of trucking activity over a 19-month period, roughly. So, yeah, it was multiple, four or five times worse. In terms of when we're going to come out, right now, if you look at ton miles, it's kind of moving along a trough. I don't see anything really substantially happening until the second half of next year because it's going to take the Federal Reserve cutting interest rates. And we're still getting inventories right-sized, especially in parts of manufacturing. They bought too much raw material per these, discussion points.
Not Holly, though. She bought just the right amount, I'm assuming.
I'm like Goldilocks, just right.
Well, so as you look at this, Jason. So for you, Holly, as you see this potential in second half of next year, how are you thinking about this? Like right now, I got to imagine no one's rejecting your tenders. Like you must have some great numbers to show to your team right now.
Absolutely. My scorecards are looking awesome. I'm like at a 99.5% first tender acceptance rate. My on-time pickups and deliveries are actually quite good. And the realist in me is like, maybe I gave too much money, right, Dean? Maybe I was too generous with my loads. But you know what? Honestly, to me, it's about relationship building, right? I don't want to be a transactional shipper because my product is heavy, my product is consistent, it goes far. I want to have long-term partners. And so where I have a lot of folks that that chit chat with in the industry, they went to mini bids and they were conducting these mini bids every 60 days and ratcheting down. I've taken a more austere approach in that sense. Because to me, it's almost like, wait, no, if it's working for me, if the market changes so rapidly and it's $1,200 less a truck, then yes, I have to do the fiscally responsible thing. But rather than going and bidding out all of my business, I speak to my top 3 or 5 carriers, right? The ones who are in my routing guide. And I say, hey guys, look, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm being offered. This is what I'm hearing. What can we do together on these lanes specifically, right? Your bread and butter. Where can we make it so there's more parity? And that's going to be my goal for next year as well, right? When I go into my bid for my full truckload, it's going to be talking about long-term partnership and relationship because I recognize that folks play the spot market. I may keep 15 to 20% of my volume kind of loose, right? Because I do want to be able to play and move it around. However, there is value to having assets, drivers, reliability. And I think, Dean, you could probably speak to that as well, right? You want partners who are going to be with you for 3, 5, 10, 20 years, because that means both of you are growing together.
Yeah, I could, if this is a good point for me to jump in and respond to that. I can't agree with you more, Holly. We talk about it all the time. Quite frankly, our ability to deliver our product to our customer relies on strategic partnerships that are built on trust, that are built on support and taking care of each other, right? I mean, that's how it is. And we're a family run business. That is in the core of who we are. So we are always looking for those partnerships, and we get it, right? And we went through that. We've gone through that. We are going through it. We got surcharges, right? We would order trucks, in February of one year and get that truck, receive the truck in February of the next year, right? And so when you're financing a truck, guess how many interest rate increases went on before that truck showed up and you actually finalized from what you quoted the truck for, to what you ended up delivering the truck for, not to mention surcharges for aluminum, for lumber, for things of that nature that you had to go back to your customers. So we worked really hard with our vendors to keep that tight, right? And they did us. And the ones that took, we understood what was going on, right? We weren't that guy slamming our fist on the table, but then we have to go back, right? And it goes downstream and it goes to a customer. So we wanted to be the guys who were out front, who were 100% transparent and honest with that. And with that those are based on strategic partnerships that we're going to need. And I think, right, I mean, you think of what's going on in the transportation industry, OEMs partnering together, competitors, Daimler and Volvo on different initiatives for, when in the world would you ever have thought you saw that? But strategic partnerships, life is really like your phone, right? You got to have this, and you got to have all the apps, and the apps are your partnerships, and you got to keep those strong. And the stronger you have strategic partnerships, I think the better off, you're going to be.
Well, I can imagine, like, on the Port of Long Beach or the Port of LA during the pandemic, the 100 boats sitting off. And I imagine all your stuff is sitting there, Holly. I imagine, Dean, all the components for the manufacturers are sitting there. Jason, can you kind of give us an idea, like, at the height of this craziness? I remember seeing like 100 boats sitting. I mean, how have we resolved that? How is it looking these days? What kind of insights can you offer on that?
Yeah, so I mean, the key thing is imports today actually are now, believe it or not, higher year over year than they were last year at this time. Now, granted, they were falling rapidly last year, but they're still, depending on your preferred metrics, somewhere between 10 and 15% above where they were in 2019. It was just, we saw a demand surge in 2021 and really the first part of 2022 that had no historical precedent. And, typically you've got this March lull where LA and Long Beach always had a chance to clean out. That didn't happen in 2021. You had just continued imports coming in, and basically just everything started getting snarled towards the end of May, started June. Because, I mean, you had the railroads, the first half of 2021 is the record intermodal movements all time for a 6-month period. And then the back half of 2021 looked like 2019 when it should have been the record set of moves. And so it took time. It took effectively, I'd say 6 to 9 months for everything to clear out, but it finally did. It's just like a log jam on a freeway, except on a much, much, much larger scale.
Well, I heard all this like diversion of freight, people getting things going through Panama, going to Houston, going to Newark, going to Savannah. Holly, how did you guys deal with the craziness of boats stuck off the coast of California?
First, I wish could you do a poll, Matt, because I want people who are in this meeting with us to say, prior to COVID, prior to national news coverage, who knew what you did? Like, legitimately knew what you did. Because I'll tell you what, other than my dear husband who listens to me get ready for these types of meetings or for speaking at conferences, no one knew what I did. Now they're all experts. So, Jason, when you say, oh, it was around May timeframe, that's when they started getting national news. Do you know what everyone came to me and said? Why don't you just unload the boats? I was like, oh, really? Oh my goodness, you're right. And then, that of course, tongue in cheek. But then you say, okay, but you have to have the ILA. So they're going to have to add gangs. They're going to have to work overnight hours, which means they get, if they start at 5 a.m., that means at 7 o'clock the night before, you're conscripting those workers, that gang. Customs. We already heard about the glut of customs officers, right? And people to go through CBP. Okay. So now you're going to have them working 24/7, right? And you know how much the U.S. government loves to pay overtime. Then you have the dray drivers who can't get their appointments to get into the port to pick up their empties or their, to return loaded, return empty, whatever the street turns. Okay. And then you have us, the shippers, the ones who are screaming about all the stuff that we want and need. Do we do 24/7 operations? Do we allow drivers to come and do that? Do we have people working around the clock? Not typically. And Thankfully, I did not have the big sea of loaded containers like many retailers did for 3, 4, 5 months. Right. So let's just, I want to dispel the myth that the vessels were lined up and that was the problem. No, we all contributed. We all take a pound of flesh, and we're trying to clear that and correct that. So what I can tell you what we did. So we do diversify. We go both east and west coast, and I do a little bit into Gulf because I do move into Houston. So that was effective for me. I truly do primarily all domestic, but I export. And that's where it really bit me in the butt, because at one point, I have a plant right in LA, and I would love to send my batteries to APAC. In fact, I send a lot of batteries that are US made to China, right? Yay, let's take care of that imbalance of trade.
Yeah, you're doing the good work.
Right? You would think so. However, my measly, $3,000 to send a container to China is nothing compared to the $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 people were willing to pay to bring it back. So rather than allowing containers to go empty or to take, be street loaded or to me to get an empty, no, 7 of the 10 containers out of the port of Los Angeles and Long Beach were going back empty. I was like, do you want my stuff? Take my stuff. Thankfully, that the balance has shifted, and I'm able to get the space I need. The rates have fallen, but it was a very unique time because typically, they like ballast, right? They want containers that are loaded. No, not during the pandemic.
That's bonkers. That's absolutely bonkers. But I think you bring a really interesting point about just generally diversifying your supply chain. So bringing stuff in from different ports, doing different modes of transportation, rail or overseas. Do you fly anything, or is that like way outside of that level of comfort?
Oh, I don't have my drink yet, sir. But yes, I do. There are certain components that, the batteries need, right? And, a motherboard for some of our lithium batteries, I have bus bars and I have, different modes and boards that I have to bring in, and they're little guys. So yeah, I do some air freight. It is not fun. I actually have met, so having gone to conferences, and Matt, you were there, people who intentionally bake air freight into their freight budget. And I don't know, Dean, I can't. I'm just like, huh, every time someone says, oh, I plan to do $300,000 worth of air freight. I was like, oh, and you have a job? Like, you still are employed? You spent that much money on air freight? Different times, guys, different times.
I remember seeing trucks that are brand new constructed, ready to go, but they're missing a microchip and they're just lined up along fences. Like, Dean, can you talk a little like what you experienced with like the need of like special components that just were not available at the time you needed them?
We called it the component of the week, and that's really what it was. Because it still happens today. Different. It was roofs for cabs. Just a couple of weeks ago, or at least that's what we were being told. But there was a huge one that's just cleaning up right now. Quite frankly, it was frame rails. You can't send a truck down the road, having a brain cramp here. You can't send it through the factory without a frame rail, right? There were other component parts that could go in. They take the truck, they call it, they were red lotting them. They'd sit them outside, the facility, park them on grass somewhere, wait for this part, and then ship the truck to you when it was gone. You couldn't get frame rails, and it's and it was a huge issue. And that's knocked everybody back, especially on class 6 and 7 trucks, for delivery. So the computer chip one was huge, right? I think there were a couple of things. Number one, you had the shortage. Then number two, you had the ice storm, if everybody remembers, that shut down Texas. And at that point, we found out, I think I learned, and I could have this, I used to be able to know this number because I knew it right when it was happening. Never knew, but there were about 180 computer chips that go into a truck, right? And then, so to build a truck, you had to have these. And then I also learned that almost all of these things originally come into the United States and go through Austin, Texas. And one warehouse had a warehouse roof collapse and something else happened. And it was just an absolute mess. But I mean, it could have been anything, right? You can't send a truck without rear view mirrors. You can't drive it, right? And so you would have to wait for these things. And they went on in a long time, not to mention, we haven't even gotten into the labor shortages, which is really, and when you have something like building a truck body or a trailer, right? Those are heavily intensive, labor intensive. So you can bring a truck down, right? And watch the truck go down the line. And it's mostly robotic and stuff that goes on. And there's a person maybe every 25 to 50 yards. You go put a body on something or build a trailer body, it's highly labor intensive. And then if you put a lift gate on it, and you got to find a welder, right? Or put a Thermo King unit and make a refrigeration unit. All these things have come together to a point where we're still not caught up as a industry with truck replacements.
That's incredible, Jason. When you were watching this stuff, was there anything that you saw like a shortage that surprised you in terms of like what we thought we had enough of?
If you don't say toilet paper, sir, you're fired.
And nobody could have seen that one coming. And human behavior. I think it was just the extent that it was just pervasive across industries. The Census Bureau actually collects data on this stuff. And really starting the second quarter of 2021, really through about the third quarter of 2022, it was just basically every industry. It didn't matter whether it was, paper manufacturing or chemicals or transportation equipment or, computers and electronic products. Everybody was reporting issues. The only industry that really didn't report a lot of problems, funny enough, was primary metals, so steel manufacturing essentially. But that was one of the industries where you saw the steepest price increases, but that was just due to very strong demand at the time that has subsequently cooled down a bit.
Do you think we're kind of at, go ahead. Sorry, Holly.
I just want to share a little anecdote because it's something that being in supply chain for so long, I didn't even think about it. But so, I'm part of the Virginia Maritime Association. We do a lot of agriculture through the state of Virginia. And what we found is that you have these large, manufacturers like a Cisco, right? What are they doing? They're buying 5-pound tins of green beans. They're buying 20-pound vats of ketchup. Well, when we all went home, I don't want 5 pounds of green beans. I don't want 20 pounds of ketchup. And there actually was not consumer packaging. From what I've heard, the dairy farmers were pouring out milk because they were not sending it to schools, to universities. I'm sure they still sent it to prisons, but we didn't have the ability to pivot to go to consumer size. We were doing, large, I guess you would call them commercial sizes. So that's another way to think of it as well, is that the demand changed, but also the packaging and how it was being consumed changed.
That's incredible. I mean, have we solved that issue now, Jason? Does all the, and Holly, do we have most of the materials we need at this point?
For the most part, the couple sectors that are still reporting issues are the ones where demand has still stayed high. So transportation equipment. So if you're in aerospace right now, it is still not fun because aerospace is really ramping back up after having been down for multiple years. Parts of actually the industry Holly's in, so electrical, battery, things like that. There are still some shortfalls. And then domestic computer and electronics. So getting a domestically made printed circuit board is still not an easy thing at the moment.
Okay, so what I'd say is go ahead. I'm sorry, finish your thought, Jason.
No. So those are the big industries that are still having issues. But things like chemical manufacturing, which is having tremendous disruptions in 2021 and the first half of 2022, essentially everything's resolved there. Just because they had such a cool down of demand, that's really what resolved a lot of this stuff. Wasn't necessarily the supply side correcting, it was just demand, really cooled off. And I think too, again, these pivots, March of 2021, where stimulus round 3 interacts with COVID-19 vaccine distribution, sales of clothing at clothing retailers exploded 20% from March from February on a seasonally adjusted basis. Like that doesn't happen normally. That month over month, you start selling 20-25% more stuff that's not seasonal.
It's not Brooks Brothers. It's athleisure wear. That's the big thing, guys. That's one of the things, it blows my mind too, right? Think about it. Like when you're working from home, are you buying a 3-piece suit? No, you're buying joggers and you want to be comfortable.
I think you're exactly right. Now we're going to do a little pivot now for this conversation. So we've been talking about what happened, before the pandemic, what was going on during the pandemic, and we talked about how we're trying to see a more resilient supply chain as we recover. I want to talk about new technology, and I think we'll start off with this incredible idea of electrification of the moving of commercial vehicles, like having trucks and trailers and all that stuff having electricity. Dean, tell me a little bit about it. Like how great are these things, and have they solved the problems that we all talked about in the industry?
Well, number one, let me point out that Matt's at home in a 3-piece suit right now.
Thank you.
and catch that, right? Yeah. So there was one, I guess. Yeah, man. I mean, we're just I don't see it, right? I was just on a call again this morning with our industry advocacy group out of DC. I always start this with, right, we want it all to work. We want it to be better. We want to be good corporate citizens, and everybody wants to. I read a story in the Wall Street Journal today about the melting of a glacier, on top of Mount, over in Nepal, and everything that's going on. These aren't working as well. We've got them. They're not running as far as they should. The biggest piece, right? You and I have talked about it, right? It costs 300% more to operate a battery electric vehicle than it does an internal combustion engine right now. And so you've got a lot of challenges with it. The infrastructure is not there to support it. There's a lot of money that you also have to spend on top of that to get charging stations, right? You can't go down the street and go to the Pilot Flying J, fill it up, have the driver go in and get his Hostess, and a big gulp and come back out and hit the road again. So it's just not there. It's not just there. It's great. I think there's a lot of other technologies that could even pass it. I think there's other things, great advantages to natural gas that CARB doesn't want to, acknowledge yet. And I think you already kind of saw it in Oregon and a couple places, people pulling back. They're going to have to. Otherwise, we're going to have another supply chain issue, or everybody's going to find out, why do I have to pay another huge surcharge on my milk on my table? Because instead of using an internal combustion, like the company that's delivering it now is battery electric trucks, and those cost 300% more.
You mentioned CARB. So that, for those who are watching and don't know necessarily what CARB stands for, it's the California Air Resource Board. And that is one of these regulators that sets a lot of the stage for how the California operates, and that eventually trickles down to the rest of the United States. Holly, when it comes to the technology for the batteries themselves, are we there yet? I mean, the infrastructure may be still behind, the cost might be still prohibitive, but what do you see as a manufacturer of batteries when it comes to that kind of use case?
So first, I will preface is that we don't do commercial. So I don't have any batteries for you, Dean. I'm sorry. However,
I don't want them right now anyway.
Yeah, he's like, I don't want them. Good. We do support the consumer market, right? So the big three alternatives we do support with batteries, lithium batteries for their vehicles. And what I will tell you is that it's nascent technology. While electric cars have been around, since 1909, I think, is maybe when GM put their first one out, like a truly electric car. The fact that now there's a renewed interest in it and it's becoming more mainstream has helped guide the technologies and get hybrid vehicles, but also fully electric vehicles out there. What I will tell you is that we, as battery technologists, are always looking at different things. So we do a lithium ion now. We're looking at a solid state. We're looking at the different types of cores. What other metals? The mining is a very labor intensive as well as environmentally impactful process for cobalt, for nickel, for cadmium, for graphite. I don't even know if you guys know that there's a graphite shortage in the world. Yes, the stuff that goes in your pencils also goes into batteries and cars, and there's a shortage. So I believe the technology is evolving. And Dean, when we had our pre-call, I was saying to you, I sense a bit of greenwashing. And the reason I say that is because stakeholders want to see people greening their fleets, right? Whether you're a really big name with 3 letters, or, you're just a mid-sized trucking company that has over 500 trucks, we'll say, right? I don't know that I would invest the what did we say it was $365,000 for the truck? Dean, is it that much?
It's about, the cost of the truck isn't that much, but when you put it all together and you compare residual values, what's that's going to be used, and what you have to do to build up the infrastructure at your facility, it's about a 300% difference. It's probably about 50, for whatever we're buying these things for, right now, probably about a 50% increase in base cost. But then you have a lot of other things that go into it.
You get all that great marketing from it. And on the greenwashing comment, someone in the chat was just emphasizing how important that was. Gene, you mentioned in our pre-call about having to convert a place to get 12 or something charging stations. That was millions of dollars. What do we have to see as an investment to make it even reasonably practical?
Well, hey, I go back to, to make it practical, right? I'll try and simplify it maybe, too much. you've got one customer, you and your customer are going toe to toe, right? And you've got two big titans in the industry, and one guy decides to convert to battery electric right now, and the other guy stays internal combustion engine. Well, that guy's going to pay 300% more, right? So he's got to have margin integrity. So he's got to build his margin onto that. Now you have a humongous cost advantage. You also don't have, you also are losing in how far you can take it, how much you can haul, how fast it charges, how much can you use that asset? It's asset utilization, right? That was big, and still is, but big, super pre-COVID, right? There was no such thing as a trailer going empty back to China, right, Holly? I mean, everybody wanted a backhaul. You're trying to make sure you get an ROI on that piece. So there is no compelling event today to use this alternative technology outside of you want to do the right thing, or you think your consumer, your customer says you need to do the right thing. Right now it's government mandated, right? And I'm not saying that going down this path isn't the path that we should all be going down. We should. That stuff is real. Global warming and things of that nature. This just, I think the folks have not thought this through. I mean, you have to dig up a lot of ground and a lot of asphalt to put the lines in. The utilities are almost overloaded already, right? California will tell you one day that we're going to have no more internal combustion engines in 2035. And oh, by the way, turn off your air conditioner from 4 to 6 because we can't manage it right now. And nobody has spent a dime. Right here in Illinois, right? ComEd just got, hit yesterday that they can't get the price increase that they want. Well, I get it, and I know everything that's happened for those in Illinois, right? It's great political reading, but to go raise the money that these guys have to increase the infrastructure, and if everybody in your neighborhood had a Tesla, and every truck, go to the southwest side of Chicago or any major town, they're all in one area for the most part, right? So they stick us all, with these trucks. Imagine what all those things charging at one time due to the grid. You can't get there. And now you better, you're talking about inflation right now. You talk about the inflation to run at 300% increase in transportation costs to get everything delivered, right? There's no such thing as a rust, what's it cost you to go get a Big Mac right now? And a lot of that's labor cost, right? Wait till you add this cost to it, right? We love to say in my house, my kids hear it from us all the time, right? There's no such thing as farm to table. It's farm to truck to table. That's how it goes. And you're going to be increasing a ton. So you better, so everybody, it sounds great, right? Everybody raises their hand, says, yeah, let's do this. It's the right thing to do. It changes a little bit when it really starts to hit somebody's pocketbook. And I think that's going to kick it back.
Yeah, well, let's pivot on this. So Jason, as we're talking about these alternative things, I mean, obviously in your trucking company, fuel is your biggest expense. Maybe labor can compete with fuel, but fuel tends to be the thing you spend the most on. How should we be thinking about, moving to alternative power sources for moving freight?
So I really think it depends on the nature of operations, right? If you're a short haul carrier within an MSA, electric may be an attractive option. If you are a irregular route, long haul, 3-truck carrier that just is hauling whatever you can find going around the country, this is an absolutely horrendous idea. And so it has its applications, especially again, the short haul markets, this makes sense. Drayage, it's going to make sense. Even for, let's say, a JB Hunt with a dedicated fleet that averages 150 miles hauling to and fro, same locations, it's possibly going to make sense. Where the economics breakdown is the ultra long haul, irregular route, which there always will be some of that. There's not as much today as there was, let's say, in the late 1990s when we were a little bit more manufacturing-centric economy. We're a little bit more distribution-centric economy, and the average shipment from a wholesaler goes a heck of a lot shorter than a shipment from a manufacturing plant. So I think that there's certainly applications, but I think that broad-based, again, we're decades away because you have to have a charging station that can support multiple vehicles essentially everywhere. I mean, I used to live in Colorado, and I always remembered driving through, if you drive back to Ohio or Michigan and you go through Kansas, there's literally a spot in eastern Colorado where if you're, you stop, it's like, okay, there's not anything for 100 miles from here on out. You're going to have a charging station in that exact location. How is there a business case for that? I don't really necessarily see it.
If I could jump in real quick too, because I really agree with everything Jason said. I think there's a couple things that a lot of folks, unless you live this every day, right, aren't thinking about when they do their cost comparison, right? And that is, how are you going to change? What's the kilowatt hour going to be when you have to have the infrastructure built and you invested it in so that you can charge all these Chicago Tribune trucks, Alpha Baking trucks, Pepsi trucks? That makes sense to Jason's point. You also haven't, you also have to replace the fuel tax, right? That builds the infrastructure of this country. That has not been in there, and that's already taken a big hit. I mean, that took a huge hit going from 6 to 9 miles per gallon. 20 years ago, right? I mean, think about that. These are billions of dollars that go into the infrastructure that's not always being utilized as a comparison, right? They love to use today's kilowatt hour versus diesel. There's also going to be a global sell-off of diesel at the end. There's going to be a garage sale, right? At the end of the day, it's going to crash. That's why I keep going back to the thought. I think the last guy that transitions wins right now. To go through that part of it, but and I could definitely be wrong, and I may change my mind down the road, but that's where I sit today. But you have a lot of tax, a lot of infrastructure, a lot of stuff that comes from these areas, right? What's the cost of fuel in Illinois? What's the tax? How are you going to replace that money? Well, you got to put it into the kilowatt charge or whatever, or a license charge that's a lot higher than what you're getting now.
We have a question in the comments. I'm going to read this. Actually, I think it's for Jason directly, but I think, Holly, you'd have some insights on this too. And I'm going to read this. It goes, Jason, do you see more manufacturing heading back to the U.S. with the nearshoring that is trending in Mexico? Politics and interest rates aside, like, what do you think about that? The idea of nearshoring or China plus one?
So certainly there's a lot of interest in, adding factories in Mexico. A lot of the companies adding factories in Mexico are Chinese multinationals now. So I don't exactly get, this idea that we're going to be independent from China or quasi-independent from China and from global trade is an absolute joke. In terms of manufacturing heading back, it ain't showing up in any of the manufacturing data yet. The sectors that we heavily offshored, take textiles, take small electrical appliances, things of that sort. There's no increase in industrial production right now. Production is half of what it was in the 90s in some cases. In the case of apparel, it's a seventh. Peak apparel manufacturing in the United States was in 1995, believe it or not. We manufacture a seventh of the apparel that we used to in just 30 years. This stuff ain't coming back. People
this
can
idea
talk.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
It would just be like shore washing. So if we have greenwashing on one side, like we're going to make it look like we're really efficient. Like, no, we're making it in Mexico. It's just owned by someone who's.
So I would argue, because reshoring has a very specific definition in academia, and it is the following. You used to have an activity that was performed in the United States, either by yourself or by another supplier in the U.S. You shuttered the manufacturing operations, and then you shifted those manufacturing operations overseas, let's say specifically to China. That could be a third party in China, or that could be you opening your own factory. That was what a lot of the great offshoring was. The specific definition of reshoring then is I close my plant in China, I reopen a facility in the United States, either, again, me doing it or another party doing it. A lot of what we're seeing is discussions of reshoring. It's just expansion of manufacturing footprints, building in the United States, which is no different than when Toyota or Honda came to the U.S. in the 80s. A lot of people are getting all excited about this, construction spending on manufacturing plants. I don't, as a statistician, I put a little bit less faith in that data, because what we're building now disproportionately is a bunch of super expensive semiconductor plants and super expensive battery plants. So it has this huge nominal spend, even and the price deflators aren't keeping up with it. So it's essentially a little bit of a statistical artifact right now. When you look at U.S. manufacturing employment today, it's about 13 million. It was 17 million in the late 1990s. It's never going back to 17 million, at least not in the next 20 or 30 years.
And actually, I'd like to kind of piggyback on that, Jason, because you are correct. So I would say what I'm seeing talking to colleagues is what I call supplier optionality, China plus one. Or we would call it near sourcing. So maybe we don't want to be in China because of the 301 tariffs. Cool. Let's do Vietnam. Let's do Malaysia, right? So they're finding alternatives, and it is slowly creeping down into Southeast Asia as well as back onto the North American continent. But again, as we're still reeling from the effects of the pandemic, there will be some loss of memory, guys. And people are going to eventually look at it and say, wow, why is my cost of goods is up 3%? Why is that? And then you have to say, well, we have, 70% still comes from China, 30% comes from our second supplier, and here's why, and it's a higher cost, but we have elasticity. You know as well as I do, when dollars to donuts and people want to make money and you haven't met your numbers in 2 or 3 quarters, you're going to find a way to flex it back to the lower cost option. So I think that the supplier optionality is going out there. Being in a battery manufacturing firm, no one really wants to work in a dirty lead acid battery firm. Like manufacturing jobs, our jobs are hard. Man, it gets to like 105 degrees when you're working in front of the furnaces that we have, right? We're melting lead, we're making our grids. It's a tough job. It is not an easy job. And one of the things that we're finding is that folks will come in, they're excited, the paycheck is good, the benefits are good, even the hours can be good. It's physically tolling. And if someone is not prepared for that lifestyle, they're going to dip out of manufacturing. So we have a 3-month period, right, where we're ramping up. We go through training. We have them, get certified on all of our machines. And then and get to summertime and it's 118 degrees in there. They're like, bye. Nope. Bye. So again, finding the workforce, if you can't automate, finding the workforce to support that is going to be very challenging.
Well, I'm going to take what you just said here. You used the word automate. Let's pivot out of this electric thing. I love electricity. I love batteries, but I really love robots. And for the folks who are watching this right now, I'm going to give a little bit of like some legal background to give you some idea. So autonomous trucks are actually running in some places in intrastate within a given state. The FMCSA, which is the regulatory body, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, has gone into a mode of looking for advanced notice of supplemental rulemaking. It's a very technical legal definition around what we call level 4 and level 5 automation. Level 4 automation is no driver in the truck, but there's a remote operator, somebody who's somewhere else controlling it, like a drone pilot. And level 5 is the truly remote assistant. They may come in and help occasionally, but it is the robot does what the robot does. I fundamentally believe that the robots will come before we have electrification of the trucking industry, because I think there's a lot of infrastructure. I'm curious, Dean, how much are you thinking about robots? How excited are you about those robot trucks that are out there today?
Yeah. So this is where I probably know I'm probably wrong. But I probably disagree with you respectfully. I don't see that happening before the other, what I'll call the alternative power revolution, right? That's going on. I think there's a lot of things, and fundamentally, right? I think it'll be hard to get a bunch of people to legislate trucks going down the road. I envision maybe a world where maybe a bunch of trucks from, a lane is built on I-50, 5 from St. Louis to Chicago, and from 11 o'clock at night till 6 in the morning, you could have a convoy of things, dropping off at certain places, maybe. But I think it's a hard time, and especially, if I just always go back to, right, it's probably the Chicago kid in me. How are you going to tell a bunch of Teamsters that we're going to robots? I think the worst thing they ever did to this technology is they used to call it the driverless truck, right?
Yeah, that was a big mistake.
You're just scaring everybody to death, and that's where everybody's still at it. And you can make your argument, hey, the airplane flies itself, this stuff does itself. Taking a butt out of the seat, I think, isn't something I'm ever going to see in my lifetime, outside of certain areas, out west and some places that it's running, and maybe this idea, which would cost a ton of infrastructure, to say that there's going to be a convoy of driverless trucks going from St. Louis to Chicago at night, hauling from one DC to another to get then get split off for local deliveries.
We have those convenient HOV lanes that are separated by Jersey barriers. I'm just saying we could convert the HOV lanes.
Yeah.
What about for you, Jason? Like you come from this industry, you know this business. What do you think about the autonomous trucks? I saw you shaking your head in agreement with Dean that these were further out than people think.
Decades. I mean, for one, drivers do a lot more than drive. Like that is the one. And the BLS, literally, there's a paper from 2020 by 2 very good economists who've done research on trucking. truck driving jobs, are they headed for rapid elimination? And their conclusion is categorically no, because drivers do a lot more than drive. They, as Dean mentioned, they're really only going to be feasible for select interstate journeys, particularly out west. And at the end of the day, there's just not that much balanced freight flow in the United States where the super expensive intercity long distance movements are going to make sense. And again, drivers do a lot more. I mean, you know, than just drive. You're not going to be able to completely trust that truck to do everything. There's too many, unanticipated situations. See GM San Francisco, how well that situation played out, right? I think I see much more of a business case for electrification than I do self-driving vehicles.
Well, I like you said it, because like when I think about automation for trucking, I don't think like an LTL P&D operation. I kind of think of, like we talked about, like that middle mile from maybe a travel center to a travel center, or like maybe a spotting truck at a DC with a private property, or even forklifts. I could see a forklift use case being something that could happen. But I know on the manufacturing side, we've seen automation creep into everything. I mean, no one's saying let's go back to hand packing our pallets. Like they're using robots, and there's no doubt it'll come for us. The question is like, how soon? Holly, what are you thinking about this? Are you thinking, man, I sure would like those robot overlords, or what are you thinking it's going to take a little bit more time?
Clearly, you and I are in the pro robot camp.
Yes,
and both in the anti robots.
We tie. It's a good thing. 2 to 2.
Yeah, it's good. But again, and I think I absolutely concur with both Jason and Dean. Like, listen, this isn't going to happen next year. Although I did see really cool video of a Chester the Cheetah wrapped trailer delivering Frito-Lay snacks with no driver. But I would say, as we look at the evolution of transportation jobs, right? There has always been talk that long haul drivers, there's some folks that are retiring out. Maybe folks want to be home more frequently. So if we are able to automate the middle mile, right? Like, as you were saying, if we have a long haul stretch going from the West Coast ports to DC's further east, and rail is not an option, which let's not even get started on rail anyway. But yeah, I do see a benefit. I agree that the public would have to be on board, which is why I do think that having a separate lanes or separate parts of the highway, driving up 95 through New Jersey, you have the trucks and buses and cars lane, and then you have the cars only lane, right? And so if you're able to quarantine that to show and garner the support and trust of the public, and it's more and more, well, I was gonna say, we could use Tesla, but aren't they recalling it because people were sleeping behind their autonomous vehicles and their monitor wasn't?
People do dumb things. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, but I do think there is a place for it. I would say maybe 10, 15 years from now, it might be more impactful. But again, we would need to see, as you were saying, you need to see the rebound of the supplies. You need to have consistent. Is it grocery stores? That might make sense, right? Or there's certain industries that might be better served.
Yeah, well, I would say we'll wrap that up because we're getting close on time. I have one more topic I want us to touch on. So just one interesting fact on the autonomous trucking space. We did see OIDA in California try to push legislation to make it in California where you had to have a human being driver. And that passed the Congress of that state, but the governor ended up vetoing it. So the regulatory landscape is still evolving. I do think if, as long as labor is still your biggest cost in trucking, or one of your biggest costs, there's going to be a big focus on doing this. I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the story of
Let me add one more piece, which I think is a big one, to AI, right? Do you think the insurance companies have a huge lobby? Do you know how much revenue leaves the insurance industry and everything if all of a sudden nobody's driving a car?
It's all product liability then. You're still going to buy insurance, but it might be a different policy.
It ain't going to be the same. It ain't going to be the same premiums.
Well, let me segue to the last topic because we get close in the last 5 minutes of our discussion. We saw the biggest trucking bankruptcy in U.S. history with Yellow, a 99-year-old, $5 billion a year, 33,000 employees strong trucking company. An end of an era, a different entity from a bygone era. What do you think about this, Jason? Like, you have deep ties in this business. You see this thing happening. You saw it unfold. It's still unfolding. What are your thoughts on the whole Yellow situation?
It's a company that's been on death's doorstep since the global financial crisis. I mean, bluntly, I do a lot of academic research on employment dynamics, and this sounds very callous, and so I'll preface it like this, but we just call this reallocation. This happens all the time. Every year in trucking, 27% of jobs are reshuffled across carriers. 27% on average. As some companies gain jobs, others destroy jobs because they downsize or go out of business, and we have new entrants come in the market. So every year, 27% of jobs get reshuffled. It typically is happening at these very young, very small carriers with 3-4 employees, and so we don't hear about it in the news. Yellow is a discontinuous drop in the employment statistics. Like, it is an outlier other than April of 2020 when we had so many drivers laid off because of social distancing. So it is a unique event. It hasn't fundamentally changed the dynamics that LTL volumes are still soft. We haven't seen a dramatic increase in LTL prices yet. We haven't seen a deterioration in service to any meaningful degree. And so it shows how much overcapacity that sector of the industry has been. But for lack of a better term, it's a big event, but it's not anything, as I guess an economist I would say, is sort of special. It's a failure of a big company, but it didn't fundamentally change the industry in any way, shape, or form. Same way Convoy's failure, to be blunt, was a blip. Brokerage market still kept working perfectly fine the next day.
Before I want to ask you about Yellow as well, Holly, but I'll just say on the convoy piece, one thing I'm just going to, for the folks who are watching this, I have an interesting theory. So we have not actually seen Convoy declare bankruptcy. They have not filed for bankruptcy protection. What I believe we're seeing is Convoy sold a division of their business to a company called Flexport. And the way the bankruptcy code in the United States operates is you are considered insolvent for 90 days before you file. So any deal that you do in those 3 months before you file can be unwound. So my expectation is for folks who are like, hey, why isn't Convoy declared bankruptcy? Wait until 90 days after the Flexport deal, and then they'll do it. I'm putting my bet on there. But Holly, Yellow was known for moving hazmat. They were known for moving really weird stuff. Did you work with them? Did you have any relationships in that business over the time in your career?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, when you talk about a nationwide carrier, right? There's just certain names that are out there that if I needed to move product from an arbitrary little place, I can tell you that the super regionals were not going to go there, or if they did, it was once a month. So I needed to play with the big boys, right? And I still do. I agree. It's been since 2007, right? They've been going out of business since 2007. And so to me, it was more about being wise. And what I did was actually started to decouple back in the spring. We started seeing a lot of delivery issues or just visibility. And so for us, it was like, okay, we augmented, added another nationwide, but also some super regionals that actually came in. And to your point, prices have not increased, but I was actually able to see some benefit in allocating through super regionals because I was giving them what they wanted. They wanted these lanes and I was giving them those lanes. And so I was very fortunate. We only had six shipments that were impacted when the doors finally closed, and all but 2 of them were delivered. And, the other ones, I'm sure like in 6 months, I'll get a call, hey, come out here and pick up your pallet of, batteries or whatever. But I agree. I think there's reorganization, reallocation.
Well, I think about like last time we saw something was Consolidated Freightways. That was back in like 2002, 2003. I mean, it's the end of the big three. I mean, my dad's a roadway guy.
Central, New England Motor Freight. But again, but like
LME too. Got LME
and Celadon. I mean, we've had a good run.
The thinning of the herd has been going on for 10, 15 years, right?
It's feast or famine. It's always been this way. Dean, for you, like you've been in this business for a minute. What was your thinking of your experience with Roadway in your career and Yellow, obviously, and like where we're at today with that business?
Yeah, I sit on an opposite side of the transportation sector with it. I just wrote down what Jason said because I'm going to steal that and say it because people ask me about Yellow all the time. I knew enough. We'd rent some trucks to Yellow when during holiday seasons or peak demand seasons or things of that nature. But I also knew enough, in studying Washington to know that company had 9 lives, right? And probably should have been gone a long time ago. I think it's really interesting that, because you always hear about what it's going to do, right? For us, we're like, all right, what are all these trucks going to do to the used truck market, right? These are all going to hit, unless somebody just buys them out in bulk, right? Things of that which I can't imagine why anybody would want to right now. So it doesn't really affect our stuff as much, as long as, unless, there was a truckload of parts coming to one of our facilities that, to Holly's point, that's sitting somewhere. So
Well, I
not
gotta imagine, like,
a huge piece for us.
I mean, they're probably worth more dead than alive. I mean, we're just now watching the sale of the real estate that they had. And they had collected a lot of great property in places you can't build anymore. So that's a fantastic piece of
well, real estate, right, is another humongous need in this industry, right? I mean, you drive by an exit ramp and you see drivers sitting out on exit ramps who don't get in. I was talking to Derek Leathers, who, one time said one of their biggest challenges, right, is guys coming off, even if they got another half hour of time left, because they're afraid if they keep going down to the road, they're not going to find a place to park and go get a shower and go get a meal at night. So that real estate is humongously valuable. It's probably the most important thing, because, with all the stuff you're talking about, the one thing we're going to continue to need that we're not getting a workaround on is real estate. And you're going to better have a place for all those charging stations too that you're going to put in.
Hey, Matt, you'll appreciate this. I literally in that time just pulled from the Census Bureau the number of trucking firms in general freight trucking that existed before dereg, so 1977 or sooner. There were 14,473 employing 500,000 people. Today, there's 1,372 of those firms still around. So we've seen the vast majority of them are gone, but they still employ 412,000 people. So we still have... we've lost like over 90% of them, but they're still employing 400,000. So some of the big legacies are still around from the old days.
Yeah,
Jason,
maybe not union.
And to that point, right, we've gone from about 145 members to down to about 120 today. I forecast we'll probably be under 90 members within the system, but we'll have more locations, and we'll have, truck dealers, right? You look at the amount of dealerships in the Freightliner and the Volvo world, right? Every day, somebody's buying somebody else, and there's going to be less of these guys on the road, but they're going to be bigger, right? Bigger and less guys. So, I mean, that's grocery stores are the same way, right?
Yep.
Well, and the legacy continues. So like we Roadway's gone, Yellow's gone. FedEx is still here, and FedEx Ground, for those who are watching us, that used to be called Roadway Package System. That was Roadway's answer to UPS. We see like Daimler Trucks North America. We see the Freightliner. Who made Freightliner? Consolidated Freightways. That's who made them. So even if the world is changing, the news is obviously interesting. These legacies, like the operators, are still here, and they're still doing awesome stuff. As we get ready to wrap up, I want to let everyone have a last kind of thoughts as we wrap up today. So I'm going to start reverse order. I'll start with you, Dean. What do you want to leave the audience with as they think about what you do in your role, and then what we should expect in 2024?
Yeah. So what we do in our role, right? Dedicated logistics truck leasing company, right? We help companies where transportation is a necessary evil. It's not what they do. It's not who they are, but they want to have their name on the side of the truck. They want to have their driver, or we'll provide the driver, with their uniform on, to provide their truck. But, they make another product. Transportation is not their core business. And that's who we support throughout the United States and Canada. 2024, I'm extremely, pessimistic about, I'll be honest with you. We're just finishing up our budget, just came out of some things. We are really, projecting a flat year. I'm a little more, I hope Jason's right in that we're going to come out of something in third and fourth quarter. I'm not as optimistic about it. We're seeing a Christmas that is, we really look at it with our rental utilization. We are not getting phone calls from UPS or FedEx, and they'd be calling us every day in a normal year, even pre-COVID, to rent as many trucks as they could. So I think numbers that are going to come out in first and second quarter, I'm projecting that it could be a rough run for at least through the next year for us. So we're, I hate to say these things, right? It's the worst time frame in my history. We're preparing for a 2009 type of thing and hoping for the best.
Jason, I'm gonna let you.
Well, that's my positive news. I'll pass it on. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We're all feeling excited and relaxed now. It's good for shippers, though, presumably. Jason, what are your thoughts? What we can think about for next year?
Yeah, so I think next year, pricing wise, let's focus dry van truckload. It's going to be a weak start of the year. We still have too much capacity. Demand is not in a great position. Capacity's not left the market as quickly as most expected, and it's unlikely to do that. I've heard people say there's going to be this magic inflection point and then there'll be a bunch of capacity leave. That's never happened historically, so we can't plan for that. I don't see the economy dipping into a recession. We're already starting to see more confidence in that, soft landing actually taking place. I think once the Fed actually lowers interest rates, I'm not expecting till June. I think people talking March are way too optimistic. I think you'll see a fairly quick snapback in, housing activity and things like that, because that'll really make people feel that we have landed the bird. So I expect it's going to be a fairly soft year for the start. Could be a little bit better the second half. 2025 could be possibly the year where we actually see the next sort of freight bullish market. But I think the one thing to keep in mind is we're unlikely to see anything even like we saw in 17, 18, where we had this sort of perfect storm of factors. And 2020 through 2022, the first quarter, that's an outlier. Forget that. Like, exclude that from your memory. That is not going to happen to the freight market again.
We hope.
We hope. It shouldn't. That's a once in a generational event. But the other thing too is, we've had recessions before and they're not the GFC. That's like our baseline now. That was such a horrible, horrible, horrible recession. We can never baseline that anything is going to look like that anytime soon.
Well, that sounds encouraging. How about for you, Holly? What are you looking forward to in 2024, and what are you most excited about?
Okay, so I want to play the supply chain prognostication game.
Yes.
So when we talk about yellow, right? And Estes made overtures, and their bid was accepted, and is going through all sorts of review, right? I think that the party who is willing to pay for the portfolio is not just looking for expansion. If anything, they're looking for a competitive advantage to shutter existing locations to keep their competition out of those areas, right, Dean? If everyone wants to be in the north side of Chicago and you're the only one with the real estate there and you can keep out your cronies, I think it's going to be a larger play, a much more. They're not playing checkers, they're not playing chess, they're playing 3D chess. Okay, so that's my prognostication for that. But what I would like to leave you all with for 2024 forward is that we really do need to learn from what happened with the COVID pandemic, with the Russia-Ukraine incursion, with all the vessels getting stuck in the canals, what's going on in the Panama Canal right now. And the term that I've used, and I've shared it with these guys too, is that it's crisis catalyzation. As I said before, no one knew what we did, guys. I think someone put in the comments, yeah, if it goes along swell, everyone's like, yeah, this is great. And when it stops working, everyone's like, what the heck? What happened? Right? We need to be able to capitalize on that. We need to take the crisis and catalyze it and use that notoriety, for lack of a better word, with our executive teams to secure bandwidth, to secure technology, to secure funding, to secure the respect at the table when you have these discussions for your 2024 and beyond budgets, because people's memories are short and we need to capitalize on that now, sharing the results, sharing the information, beating the drum, for lack of a better word, to get the support and sponsorship that we need within our organizations.
I couldn't
agree.
If
I can jump on one thing here to add, and looking forward to 24. 24 means model year 25 truck, right? And which means we are getting eerily close to model year 27 truck, which has new EPA standards, which is going to add $40,000 to $50,000 to the price of a truck. I know some big players out there, and we're already talking to our customers too about a 3-year strategic plan to replace your fleet, or as much of your fleet as you can, or you're going to buy this new one that's going to have technology that we're not sure of. Right? Everybody remembers the Max Force engine, and
I do,
in things of that nature. So that's the other piece. So you're going to see people ordering trucks. I think this little bubble right now of people not filling their allocation, they may go back to regret because they might not get allocated that slot back. And there's going to be a huge rush of ordering trucks and a supply chain shortage of trucks that people are going to get shut out of if they don't, or they're going to end up having to buy a truck in 27 which actually is a 26 order, which is going to cost an increased amount of money with a lot of unproven technology.
That's a great point for us to kind of wrap up on. I want to thank everybody who's watching, who's been a part of this conversation so far, the comments and questions. We really appreciate it. This is our first kind of experiment with this. At least for me, it's my first experiment. So I hope everyone who had a chance to participate enjoyed it, learned something. Look, we're all trying to survive this industry, and everyone on this call is going to realize this is a hard business. Like, you have to be tough to survive. And we're very grateful to have both Dean and to have Jason and have Holly bring their expertise and bring it to the CSCMP Chicago Roundtable and for other roundtables that have a chance to participate. Chris, I know you're the one who's the master behind the scenes. I have no idea what we do after this point. So like, I presumably we just continue talking for a moment, but I just want to say thank you to everybody who was able to come and attend today.
All right. I think I got my mic turned on. My video's coming back as soon as I allow Firefox to use it. Yeah, I'm going to hit stop because you don't need any more recording, right?
I think that's a fair statement.